Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second plenary session. My name is Simon Long. I'm a journalist with the Economist magazine, and I'm extremely grateful to the Asan Institute both for organizing this forum and even more particularly for inviting me back to what must be about my fourth Asan event, all of them of an extremely high standard. I'm not going to spend a long time introducing the theme of this session because it's been much discussed throughout the day, but I would just like to, in a way, very briefly summarize some of our discussions so far in 4 bullet points. One is that this is a time of heightened tension in the region, both between all of China, the Republic of Korea, and Japan, and between all of them individually and the DPRK. Secondly, despite all that, there's a secular trend of economic integration, which is, if anything, accelerating. We've just seen the announcement in Phnom Penh of the formal launch of the RCEP to bring a lot of regional trade arrangements together. Thirdly, we're seeing recent or imminent leadership transitions in most of these countries. Come next March, and the change of presidents here, Kim Jong-un will be looking like the regional elder statesman. And fourthly, there seems a consensus that things are not going very well. We started the morning, in Bill Overholt's nice phrase, on a downward cycle of distrust and have moved from there to the brink of Cold War and several mentions of possible hot ones. So what I'd hope in this last session of what has indeed been quite a long day is if we could, instead of airing our disagreements about how we all got into this mess, is if we could maybe look forward as to what can now be done to get out of it. And I'm very fortunate to have an extremely distinguished panel to discuss that. We have representatives from Japan, China, South Korea, and the rest of us. And that's Linda Jakobson, for the rest of us, from the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Lee Chung-min from Yonsei University here in Seoul, Yinhong of Renmin in People's University in Beijing, and Noboru Yamaguchi of the National Defense Academy in Japan. And we'll go in that order and start with you, Linda.
Thank you, Simon, and let me first echo my thanks to Asan not only for organizing such a remarkable China forum, but also for inviting me to be part of it here today. I'm going to try and perhaps make a few points that come at these questions from a slightly different angle. As Simon said, we have quite thoroughly in several sessions this afternoon discussed what relates to the topic of today's or this evening's plenary session, China in Northeast Asia. I'm going to make a few general observations which end with a question, which I'll then try and answer about first, China's role on the Korean Peninsula, and secondly, China-Japan relations. In the case of the Korean Peninsula, we have China's much publicized policy of putting stability first. In other words, China's very strong fear of instability erupting in North Korea and spilling over into northeast parts of China if Pyongyang is pressured too much to dismantle its nuclear program. I think everyone in this room is aware of Beijing's priorities vis-à-vis North Korea: no nukes, no war, no instability, no nukes. And it's important to see the order: no war and stability outranks everything else, including denuclearization in terms of the importance from Beijing's perspective. So I'll try and address the question, is there any sign of China's North Korea policy changing? In the case of China-Japan relations, there's this highly complex relationship in which historical issues, very vibrant economic ties, Japan's anxiety vis-à-vis China's rise, China's anxiety vis-à-vis the Japan-US alliance and the ROK-US alliance, they're all intertwined now with this ongoing sovereignty dispute over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. And of course, the most pressing issue at the moment is can Beijing and Tokyo manage to find a way to diffuse these high-strung tensions, or at least to manage them? And as this session in particular concentrates on China in Northeast Asia, I'm going to pose the question, what can we expect from Xi Jinping on this specific issue? So first on China-North Korea relations. North Korea is one of the most divisive. Zhu Feng this afternoon said the most divisive foreign policy issue among Chinese people, I would say among Chinese leaders. I think Xi Jinping will ultimately continue to be the decision maker on any major North Korea-related issue in a time of crisis, just as Hu Jintao was. When I was doing research in 2010, I was told that Hu Jintao even had to himself edit the final wording of China's official reaction to the North Korea nuclear test in 2006 because no one wanted to take responsibility for that wording. I personally do not see signs of China's long-standing North Korea policy changing. So in this regard, I do disagree with Colonel Tang Jianchun's assessment this afternoon that we might see a rebalancing of Beijing's North Korea policies. I think the motives of China's policies have not changed, and nor have the people who are in charge of those policies. As far as the people are concerned, I see only continuity. Excuse me. Zhang Dezhang, now a Politburo Standing Committee member, will inevitably be involved in any major discussion concerning North Korea within the Politburo Standing Committee. I note the very same qualities that Ambassador Chung did in the previous session in this room. As a young adult, he studied in North Korea. He spent a substantial part of his mid-career in Jilin, reaching the post of party secretary in Jilin in the early 2000s. But I come to a very different conclusion than Ambassador Chung as far as what does this mean. A collapse of North Korea, an influx of refugees into Jilin province and northeast China at large would be catastrophic from the Chinese perspective. Zhang Dezhang has been a part of the contingency plans. I spoke to him when he was a party secretary in Jilin in 2001. So he's been part of those plans, and I think he's a man who definitely sees the benefits of and supports the policy of putting stability over everything else. So I view Zhang Dezhang's ascent into the Politburo Standing Committee as a sign of continuity of China's present North Korea policies. And then the same applies to Wang Jiarui, the other point man in China who works on North Korea. He continues to be a member of the Central Committee, and whatever job he ends up with, whether it's that he continues as head of the international department of the CC, which, as we know, is in charge of the day-to-day North Korea relationship, or if he's given a senior, broader foreign policy role, he's still going to be very involved in the China-North Korea relationship. According to the research that I did in 2010, Wang Jiarui in particular was vocal and adamant that China should not take a critical stance against North Korea in public after the sinking of the Cheonan and the North Korean shelling of Yongpyong Island. And then in addition, several CMC members, and as we heard from Colonel Tang this afternoon, also elderly officials, have continuously opposed criticizing North Korea based on that steadfast notion that you do not turn your back on a comrade in arms. This does not mean that China isn't immensely frustrated with North Korea. I'd like to mention Bonnie Glaser's recent CSIS report. She, in this report, describes in detail the frustration and the cooling off of China-North Korea relations during the past year. So in sum, I think one can say that Chinese officials in private readily admit that they do not have an effective North Korea policy, but they do not see any alternative to doing anything other than trying to maintain stability. And of course, I have to mention the increasing economic cooperation that takes place between North Korea and Chinese provinces, which of course the Chinese see as a very important element in maintaining stability. Then on the question of China-Japan, it's evident, I think, from several conversations I've had over the past 3 weeks in Beijing, that Xi Jinping has already been involved directly in consultations on how to move forward to manage the Diaoyu Senkaku dispute or the standoff, and also that this will be his top priority initially as far as foreign policy is concerned. What does managing this standoff mean? In my mind, it means a tacit agreement that Japan continues to quietly, certainly not publicly, accept that Chinese patrol boats from time to time assert China's perceived sovereignty by patrolling in the territorial waters of the islands, and that the parties also come up with a tacit agreement on which days, for example, the Chinese vessels should patrol. And also, China in turn tacitly, not publicly, accepts that Japan does indeed claim sovereignty over these islands, and that neither side starts to bump each other with these patrol boats. That would escalate tensions to a very dangerous crisis point. I very much agree with assessments made today over the course of the day. It started with Ken Lieberthal this morning, that this standoff has the potential to spiral into a very dangerous situation with broad implications, including for the China-US relationship. I have the sense from Chinese analysts that Xi Jinping is very well aware of the dangers involved. And because economic growth, because domestic issues are absolutely at the forefront of his own agenda, it's in his interest to see that the detrimental economic effects of this standoff start to decrease. He just cannot afford a major international crisis. And then lastly, I don't agree with the argument that Xi Jinping would be persuaded to or tempted to turn the public's attention to a crisis with Japan to deter them from focusing on domestic issues. I think at least initially Xi is intent on trying to make progress, at least at a perceptual level, on various domestic issues. And as has been said so many times today, it's impossible to predict what, for example, in what direction Abe in Japan will move. Xi Jinping has very little room to maneuver. Despite wanting, I think, to find a way to manage these tensions, he cannot be perceived as caving in or even giving in to anything to Japan. He's the new leader of the Chinese Communist Party. He has to show in public that he's out there to defend China's national interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Professor Lee.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, let me thank Dr. Ham Jae-bong and his wonderful staff, not only because he has turned Asan into the major forum for international affairs in Korea, he has done this in a matter of 3 years. And I think, Jae-bong, everybody in this room, all your friends, maybe you have some enemies that are not here, but we're all very glad that you really have made Asan the fulcrum of policy debate in South Korea and in Northeast Asia, so kudos to you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just briefly go over some of the key issues that's confronting Northeast Asia, and of course China is at the apex of the issue. I think historically China faces a central dichotomy, and the dichotomy is this. Ever since the PRC was founded in 1949, she's at the pinnacle of her power. In fact, for the last 3,000 years, China has now achieved something that is truly miraculous, where the majority of its people are no longer in poverty, where China is at peace with the world, and China actually is becoming a role model for many developing states. And she has done all this in the last 40 years without civil war. And this is another truly remarkable transition. And yet, as the fifth leadership takes power in China, she also faces the convergence of unparalleled domestic challenges. And we're talking about the most globalized, educated generation in the history of China. We're talking about a burgeoning middle class. We're talking about governance and political structures that really have made, I would argue, its way over for a remodeling of the Chinese political process. How they choose to do that, of course, is intrinsically the choice of China's leaders and its people, but these two pinnacles of China's source of strength and also in certain ways weaknesses are coming to the fore much more strongly under the Xi Jinping leadership. And I think for Chinese leaders, they will have to relearn how to act like a great power. And historically, China acted like a great power because there was no competition. But today, the Northeast Asian situation is remarkably different. Now, of course, Japan is the world's third largest economy, no longer the second. Nonetheless, Japan is a formidable power. She still has an active role to play in the region. The U.S., the only non-geopolitical, I guess, geographic power in Northeast Asia, is basically here for the long term. And despite the tensions on the Korean Peninsula, we see a very different South Korea than compared to, say, 50 years ago. So I would say that of the four last of these key points, China's ability to relearn how to become a great power is going to become the litmus test. And this is more crucial because this is the only sub-region in the world where all of the interests of the major powers actually converge 24/7. And this is actually something that is unparalleled in Asian history, where you have seen the rise of three major Asian powers, China, Japan, and India, rising simultaneously. And so, but in the context of the so-called US-China relationship, what others have called the G2, this really is the ground zero for G2. In other words, if you look at the US-Soviet relationship throughout the Cold War, Europe was the basic, I guess, grounds for the East-West contest. And in that context, although it is very, very different, the US-China relationship, how it pans out, is going to have a huge repercussion in Northeast Asia. And so I think China's ability to emerge as a viable world power, as a so-called responsible stakeholder, really depends on how she actually sets out strategy in Northeast Asia. Because if China succeeds in Northeast Asia, she will succeed in East Asia, and by extension, basically in the world. And those are huge, I guess, challenges for any leadership, but especially for the PRC. So let me just then briefly turn to what I think China should do as one of the rising powers of the world. I think, honestly, it's time for China to put to rest the so-called century of shame. And China has said this over and over again, and if you go back, beginning with the so-called Opium Wars until the fall of the Qing dynasty, then of course the civil wars and so forth, China no longer needs to look in the past. And if you look at China's remarkable economic transition, I think China can say rightly that history basically has moved forward. And I think this is what the new leadership should do in terms of really telling its own people, not only must you be proud of China's achievements, but China must look into a broader horizon. And that's what I think, in fact, many Asian countries, for that matter, should do. If you look at the major issues here in Northeast Asia, although many have already pointed this out, I would argue that there are three critical issues that we have to work together on. We, as in the major powers and the two Koreas. First of all, the US and the Chinese leadership under Xi Jinping and Obama in the second administration must get off on the right foot. And I think all the signals suggest that President Obama and Secretary General Xi Jinping are going to be on the right track. But that's something that must be worked on and is hardly guaranteed. Number two, as others have mentioned, we have to manage change peacefully on the Korean Peninsula, including denuclearizing North Korea. And this will take a long time, obviously, lots of patient diplomacy. But this is something that I think for the first time you have new leadership in China, the second Obama administration. Within a matter of weeks, 10 days, you'll have new leaderships in Tokyo and in Seoul. And so combined with Kim Jong-un, who really has been in power for just a year, this really is a singular opportunity to reset the North Korean nuclear issue. And finally, of course, the Sino-Japanese relationship. And this is something that I'm sure my good friend Noboru will be able to say from a Japanese perspective. And again, whether China, Japan, and Korea can get along together for the first time, really, depends on a leap of faith. And there has to be a grand reconciliation. And nobody's naive in this room that we're going to overcome all our problems overnight. But I think this is where a real reset is critical. And I am really hopeful, or I'm hoping, that even if the LDP wins the election, as we suspect it will, that the new government of Japan will try to see history correctly. And once you're able to do so, I believe there will be a lot of trust and goodwill that will enable both China and Korea to move forward with Japan. Just final 2 words on the future of the Korean-China relationship. As you know, this is the 20th anniversary of the normalization of South Korean-China ties, as Ambassador Chung Jong-wook so poignantly pointed out. I think as a result, from a Chinese perspective, although I'm not Chinese, it's a real irony of how far and how different the two Koreas are. North Korea, in many respects, is a microcosm of what China was 50 years ago. South Korea, in many respects, is a model for where China should go. And I think these two Koreas on the peninsula really poses unique dilemmas to the Chinese leadership. And I don't think anybody in this room expects Mr. Xi Jinping to choose, one of the two Koreas. He has to get along with both. But I think the idea that you can balance relations between the two Koreas, I'm not really sure how long that will go on, simply because of the changing dynamics. So let me stop there, and then I'll continue later on.
Thank you very much, Professor Xu.
And first of all, I would like to pay my deep gratitude to Asan Institute to let me have a chance to attend this significant discussion. And today I will like to talk about a China entangled in a very divisive Northeast Asia, and we subtitle the current diplomatic situation. And I generally would like to talk about 5 issues. One is about North Korea and its entangled relations with China. The second is ROK DPRK relations and China's interest in North-South détente. The third is about the extraordinary, intensive, and highly inflammable confrontation between China and Japan now. And finally, maybe very quickly, about Mongolia being marginalized for so long time in China's foreign policy. Finally, if I still have time, I will very quickly talk about the China's new leadership and prospects of Chinese foreign policy. And about North Korea and its tangled relation with China. In my personal view, one now in North Korea, in terms of hope of economic reform, is definitely much less hopeful than rosy expectation, and of most ROK as well as Chinese media had since mid-July talk about. And NK foreign policy is still unpeaceful and nuclear missile based. The demotion of Shungang, the military first, has lost remarkably some momentum after Lowy House and its so-called kamizaz control tighter the once too elegant but stupid DPRK generals. Moreover, Pyongyang's attitude toward China has returned to complicated normalcy of an entangled alliance after drastic warming happened initially in later July. Kim Jong-un and his mentor are obviously biding their time in foreign policy tactics, waiting results of China's 18th Party Congress, which has already seen the results, and presidential election in South Korea. The Chinese leaders, I think, must know that the Pyongyang regime still loves its nuclear and missile program. And other powers, including China, have no way to make it change its mind. And the mentality and ideology in this respect in the pretty future. And so forbearance with ambiguous hope about the future on China's part will continue as long as it will not make North Korea not make a military combative action against the source. And as long as, and in a less degree maybe, test its nuclear bombs and third time. And the second issue, ROK DPRK relation and China's interest in détente. And China obviously have solid interest in North-South détente. Though the Koreans, especially the North, were not pleased to see and conceivably even not permit China's involvement beyond a minimum degree in the North-South relations, and even only for promoting some détente. And probably the anticipation of that has made China always involved so little in the North-South relations in that direction. However, the Chinese government did declare at times that it was really looking forward to seeing the reduction of tensions and improvement of relations between North and South. Or in official reported words of President Hu Jintao himself in August 2008, when he received President Lee Min-bak, that quoted, "China, as a close neighbor to Peninsula and a friend to both North-South, will be insisted, as in the past, in supporting the process of North-South reconciliation and cooperation." It's easy to realize that détente in the Peninsula will relieve China of the occasional fear of large-scale military conflict breakout there, a sort of situation highly threatening to China's security interests, and the minimum diplomatic convenience, greatly mitigated Beijing's often embarrassing difficulty in keeping itself as a friend of both South and North, and avoid American, Japanese, and South Korean responses in the form of non-combative military measures responding to North Korea's action against South, and which are almost without exception bound to make China's security environment somewhat worse as their inevitable byproduct. And the China-Japan confrontation. And you already heard a lot from Chinese government and the Chinese academic world. I will tell you something in my perception. We have some strategic lessons we should learn during the crisis. And first lessons between October 2010 and when the last crisis over Diaoyu and just passed over, and September 10th of this year. The lesson is that, and though nuclearly, in my words, Maihara doctrine, there is no sovereign dispute, this doctrine, over Diaoyu. Though nuclearly, the Maihara doctrine subverted one of the major political bases for minimally stable China-Japanese relations in the past 4 decades. But the Chinese government have not at that time stick to the struggle after the end of the last crisis. On this respect, and this has assured, in retrospect, I think, that Japan will repeat the doctrine as well as the related practice in time and destroy that basis completely. Second lesson, and this is immediately before September 10 of this year, when Noda cabinet decided and declared the nationalization very quickly and determined. The lesson is that China had not made any deterrence by clear words or deeds against nationalization, at least since August 31st, when Ishihara publicly declared that he turned his mind and agreed to nationalization. And even at President Hu Jintao's conversation with Prime Minister Noda at the last moment on September 9th, still Chinese government have not, to make any belated but might be effective deterrence. So the crisis. And also, I think since the September 10th to September 28th, when CCP Pibero declared that the 18th Party Congress would be held in November 8th, and the lessons that those during the 3 weeks most intensive confrontation. I think what happened lawlessly and violently during several mass anti-Jap demonstrations in some Chinese big cities, especially in Xi'an, Qingdao, and Shenzhen on September 16th and 17th, damaged Chinese strategic requirements and international the image very much. And
Professor Shaw, could I ask you maybe to wrap up quite quickly? You've had 10 minutes already, or we're not going to have time for discussion.
So I will, finally, I will keep up Mongolia. Mongolia is our almost nearest neighbor but its position for many years in China's foreign policy is really marginalized. And how you blame our difficulties in Mongolia, and part reason is that our under-attention. So finally, I think that if you look at China's new leadership and prospects of China's foreign policy, one thing is certain, China's new leadership, with the Chinese national power much more strengthened compared with years ago, at the same time, and face international environment much less beneficial and more complicated. In short words, and immediate foreign policy problem faced by Chinese leaders, new leaders, is that there is still no grand strategy as yet to give a rough answer to following issues. How to deal with drastically increased national strength and drastically increased popular nationalism and other complex domestic forces. How to deal with the United States, especially military geostrategic rivalry with China, and how to deal with Asian neighbors, especially territorial and maritime disputes with them, and make China's giant acceptable to neighbors in strategic and diplomatic fields. What about the drastic buildup of China's military power projection capability and the very vigorous expansion of its overseas economic presence? And how to avoid so-called maybe in executive form in the future, long future, forced imperialism, beginning with the protection of legitimate Chinese interests overseas by arms and coercion. And finally, how to contribute to global governance and how to deal with the E world, NGO world, and the various issues of soft power. And really, in the future, our task is challenging and enormous. And I think that the Xi Jinping task is quite hard. But if he has been successfully, roughly, in answering these questions, I think that China's national greatness in the future, constructive rule in the world, will be assured. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Yamaguchi.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank President Han and the Asan Institute, and let me congratulate Asan Institute for the success in the last several years. And then before getting into the point, I have to confess that I'm not a scholar at all, and I was trained as a helicopter pilot. To be optimistic, don't worry about how it flies, just it flies. So my view could be really optimistic, and I'm talking about two areas of cooperation or coordination among us. In terms of regional security, and two areas of cooperation and coordination, among others, in terms of global arena. And the first one is, of course, North Korea. North Korea, it takes time, and it is worthless to blame who is responsible, or what we have done is not enough. We have to work really hard. And in one point, we have to thank Chinese colleagues for initiating this and working really hard to make it happen. And even though many of us are not satisfied at all, but that is not the reason why we don't have to work hard on the 630 talks. So I really want to make it happen. We have to keep it. And secondly, Senkaku Diaoyu issue is even though I'm an optimistic helicopter pilot, I'm pessimistic enough to believe that we may not be able to resolve the whole issue in a couple of years or maybe 10 years. But meanwhile, I'm optimistic enough to believe that we can handle it, or we are not going to have a head-on collision among Chinese and Japanese. To be honest, I'm teaching cadets, young cadets are becoming the officers, and I don't want to risk their lives for not necessarily vital issues for Japan's national interests. So there should be lots of the room to talk for this issue. And as to this issue, most frequently asked question in Japan, I'm tired of being asked this, but is that whether the United States is ready to defend the Senkaku or not. That is ridiculous. The question itself is wrong. And the answer should be depends, because Mutual Security Treaty sets three conditions. Article 5 of Mutual Security Treaty is on the defense of Japan, bilateral cooperation on defense of Japan. Three conditions. One, it should be under Japanese administrative control. In that sense, Senkaku used to be under the U.S. military control before the reversion of Okinawa, so it is under Japanese administrative control. But second point is it should be armed attack. The fishing boat ramming into Coast Guard is not an armed attack, and dozens of activists landing on, swimming and landing on the island is not an armed attack at all. So those things should be taken care of by Japanese and the Chinese official organizations. And third point is it must be joint. I told this in the other session that even if Tokyo is attacked, if Japan is not going to defend, the U.S. has no reason to get involved in the defense of Japan. So those three things should be clear. And also, U.S. position vis-à-vis territorial dispute is clear, neutral, has no position on whether it belongs to this side or that side. That is clear. Then let me discuss about global areas. And PLA has been really active for peacekeeping operations since 1992. And actually, Japan and China started peacekeeping operation in Cambodia together. That was the first mission done by unit. And thanks to Chinese engineer battalion that took a little bit more dangerous part. We had no casualties, while PLA suffered two dead and a dozen of injured. So I really thank to this, and so since then we have been working with side by side, PLA and SDF. In Haiti we did so, and in Sudan we are now in South Sudan, while China is PLA is on the northern side. So the peacekeeping operation, of course, Korea has been very much active. If we go abroad, out of area, we could do a lot of things together. So that should be exploited in the future. The last point I would like to make is the non-proliferation or the counter-proliferation. Thanks to six-party talks. I firmly believe that if there were no six-party talks, things could have been worse. China has been working really hard, even though priority may be different. As many discussed, the stability of the Korean Peninsula comes first for Chinese, but still denuclearization of peninsula is interest of China. So we can work together for this, and I really Japan will keep asking for Chinese effort and keep appreciating the efforts by others, including China, Korea, and the United States. As to Japan and South Korea, even though we have a very high level of technology and industries, we do not go nuclear. That is one of the strong power to see more higher possibility for denuclearization of the global, in the global terms. So keep refraining from going nuclear for Japanese and South Koreans really important and should be appreciated more. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much. Just to start the discussion, I have two questions for the three of you based on something Professor Lee said. And Linda Jakobson has a question for you, but I'll get in first. If I can summarize one of the things you said about the past, I think you said basically that China had to get over it, Japan had to face up to it. I think that's a fair summary. And my question for the other three of you is, do you see any prospect of that? I mean, I think the first thing Xi Jinping did with the Politburo Standing Committee as a collective outing was to go to a museum to look at a history exhibition. And if we are to see an Abe government in Japan, it seems to be unlikely that we're going to see the sort of facing up to the past that you're talking about. So is that a realistic request that you made, if I like? Linda, would you like to take that on?
Unfortunately, I don't see China putting history behind it, and I don't see Japan facing up to it under the present circumstances, under the present mood in both countries, and especially based on the fact that we don't see political leaders who want to very strongly steer public opinion in a completely new direction, which has been talked about in so many sessions today. There does need to be a mood change, and it has to start from strong leaders wanting to guide public opinion in another direction. So no on both questions.
This is sure.
I think, of course, and the media, especially foreign media, are very much concerned and on Xi Jinping's, initial visiting to several Chinese, historical sites and to appeal to so-called national greatness. I think that this is, since Deng Xiaoping, this is the Chinese, the often do this, and because, and we have a modern history memory, which generally is Chinese national commemoration and also encouragement for Chinese people and Chinese party to struggle to become strong and richer and more, international prominent. And I think that, of course, and especially in his first 4 weeks, maybe President Xi Jinping refer to this national greatness a little more frequent than previous leaders. Reflect his personal belief in, and also reflect that he want to find some political language, somewhat a little different from previous leaders. And he still, I think, will abide by peaceful, development, orientation, which emphasized in the foreign policy section of Hu Jintao report, 18th Party Congress. But of course, I think that we can, or at least probably, expect the new administration in the next few years become a little more self-confident and a little more, assertive, maybe in positive terms, and in China's foreign policy.
Thank you.
I would answer this question this way, just briefly, is that it is extremely important for Asians and others outside of Asia to understand how crucial it is for Asia to be wealthy and free. And Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and other countries throughout Asia have shown that democracy can coexist with Asian values, that Asia can be joined at the hips with the world and continue to be a positive driver for the global community. And so obviously nobody is so naive that the Chinese and the Japanese and the Koreans will hug each other tomorrow and form an Asian union. This will take many decades, if not centuries, to come. But the most important point is there has to be a new paradigm. Why? If we continue down the status quo, and we have already seen there are key economic consequences if there is prolonged political friction. And that's the message that I think the leadership of China, Korea, and Japan must understand.
Mr. Yamaguchi, you want to go on?
Yeah, history is not a subject that the Japanese are very good at, to confess. And perhaps one of the answers to this is to do history education in Japan, the reverse, starting with tomorrow to the past. To be honest, high school kids, when they get ready for entrance examination for the universities, just reach the time where the history teaches Meiji Edo, end of Edo period. Then after Edo period, students are not interested in very much. So we have to do it. So simply they don't know, and sometimes they hate to look at the history in a scare way. And so history is one thing we need to fix.
So I was going to joke that I won't, well, I will, that a number of your neighbours would query the geography as well. Linda, you wanted to ask Professor Lee a question?
Professor Lee, yes, I'd like to ask you, I read just coming here that the Philippines have publicly expressed support for the idea of Japan looking again at their constitution and the defense clauses.
Right.
Were Japan to do this, how do you see that affecting Korea-Japan relations?
Let me give you a very diplomatic answer here.
No, please don't.
Interesting.
I think, well, for whatever reason, the Filipino foreign minister said that he would welcome a much more robust Japan, even militarily speaking, in order to constrain, if not contain, China's growing footprints in the South China Seas. From South Korea's point of view, what Japan opts to do militarily is a choice that she has to make as a democracy. We can only say, as one of our closest neighbors, that if Japan goes beyond a threshold, which we believe goes beyond self-defense, that would have negative repercussions for the region. And so from the South Korean point of view, whatever our ASEAN partners decide, it's entirely their domestic issue, but I don't think that Korea would come out in support of such a move, but neither will we be publicly going against what our ASEAN friends did. They made their choice out of their own intrinsic interests. But I don't think anybody in this room, I'd like to make one thing very clear. There's a lot of debate in Asia, in Korea, in China in particular, about the remilitarization of Japan. And I, for one, believe that Japan has been a model democracy for the past 60 years. And she has shown that as a model democracy, she's the biggest contributor to the UN. Japan plays a critical role in maintaining regional stability through the US-Japan alliance. She has provided a growing amount of ODA throughout Asia. So let's understand that Japan plays a very positive role. Now, whether Japan chooses to go out of that box is something that the Japanese leadership has to understand, and that there will be political consequences. Yeah. Sorry for being too diplomatic, Linda.
Could I ask you about the Senkaku Jiaoyus? I mean, all of you, I think, described a sort of status quo that struck me as inherently unstable, where China has routinely visits, and that somehow this coordinated quietly with Japan, so there's no bumping into each other. I mean, how long can this go on?
I think at first, if you look at the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry's statements in substantive terms, the Chinese initial demands is very clear and very firm. Japan must abandon the ridiculous doctrine. In my words, my hard doctrine, that there is no territory issue, there is no territory problem, there is no sovereign dispute over Diaoyu. This is minimum condition. I think that Jia Qingling, one of the standing committee member, and answered this in later September. But gradually, because of China must do something to compatible with Chinese people's demands. So regularly send Chinese patrol boats a few times, some warships to the very near to Diaoyu, and China found the state quo changed, and China Foreign Affairs Minister declared that China will not to return to the state quo ante. This means that China not only insists on Japan must abandon the Maihai doctrine, but Japan must accept, the end of 100% administrative control over Diaoyu. And I think that in the future, if you want to stabilize the situation permanently, and Japan must abandon the Maihai doctrine. And second, there is a fact. Japan unilaterally plays some administrative control over Diaoyu and adjacent water. And China also unilaterally play some of the administrative control over Diaoyu and and additional world order. Then if Japan abandons Maihara doctrine, then negotiation between Tokyo and Beijing can launch. And the focus is that accept the status quo and to devise some measures, effective measures, and to prevent the confrontation and disagreements in any situation escalate into military conflict. Maybe, and both sides, especially Japanese side, will agree with in writing. This time is not in speaking, and accept unilateral, partial China accept administrative, control over Diaoyu and just adjustment orders. At the same time, neither side to send any people into Ireland, to build any facilities, to touch on anything. Let this isles itself become paradise of, the wild sheep and birds. This can be not joke. I don't think
My
Chinese
magazine has
government.
called for that. Actually. I'm sure.
I don't think Chinese government will stop if this have not realized.
Professor Yamaguchi, I mean, can both sides continue to go on pretending to control the islands without at some point being a clash?
It's a hectic issue, and a kind of status quo is what both Chinese and Japanese want. And in that sense, I sometimes forget the fact that I'm still in the government. I'm a government employee, so I envy my colleague Ambassador Togo telling us that the government position which says we have no territorial disputes with Chinese should be abandoned. And this question was asked a couple of months ago in Tokyo with Chinese presence, and I was really in a problem because I belong to the government. So what I said is, according to opinion poll this summer, 62% of Japanese ordinary citizens said yes to the question whether there is territorial disputes between Japan and China. 62% of ordinary people said yes, and 59% of Chinese people said yes. So I said the ordinary people may be smarter than the government.
Thank you. At that, I'd like to open this to the floor. As usual, could I ask you to identify yourselves, say who it's for if it's a question, and questions and comments, please, not speeches. There's a microphone needed in the front row here.
Clarification about Dr. Linda Jakobson's comment on my remarks about the new leaders, particularly Chung on North Korea. What I meant was that to bring about change in North Korea, Chung would be willing to sacrifice stability on the Korean peninsula. And the consequences, as you mentioned, quite mind-boggling. That I did not mean. What I meant was that Chung given his experiences in Jilin, in Yemen in particular, and also in Guangdong, among others, he might try to persuade North Korea to embark on a path of reform and open, believing that stability, that will be a way to ensure longer stability for North Korea. Matter of fact, I believe, and this was not discussed in the earlier session where I was, North Korea-China relations, I believe, has entered into a very different phase. Perhaps if you compare North Korea-China relations during Kim Il-sung period and the Kim Jong-il period, they are different. The Kim Il-sung, it was ideological period. Kim Jong-il, it was nothing. there was the relationship was very sour, although in the year 2000, after 1998, it got improved. But still, they did not see each other eye to eye. That's how I saw it, you see. Now, Kim Jong-un is quite different. For instance, Kim Jong-il went to China after he suffered the stroke in 2008 3 times. And that was for North Korean leader to secure Chinese support when his son succeed the power. But anyhow, that's my own hypothesis. I have a serious question. We talk about Xi Jinping leadership. It was Chu Peng who said Xi Jinping, Xi and Li leadership. You see, we have 2 at least major leaders in the 5th generation Politburo Standing Committee. My point is there differences of opinion or perspective of Chinese foreign policy within the 7 Standing Committee members, particularly Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang? What I have in mind is when Li Keqiang was party chief in Liaoning province, he mentioned Japan as a very important source of investment and economic partner for development in Dongbei area. And I believe he truly believed in what he was saying. I would appreciate any members of the panel to share their thought on the differences of opinion within the top leaders, now the 5th leaders. And
on foreign policy generally?
Huh?
On foreign policy generally?
On foreign policy in general, or on any specific issues.
Mr. Costa wants to intervene.
If I could add to that question, just because I'm a little confused with the Chinese system, but who is calling the shots on foreign policy today? Is it Chairman Xi or is it President Hu? Is what, the response to the North Korean missile test, will this be Xi's first test or Hu's last hurrah?
Okay.
Professor
Yeah, I think that up to now there's only rumor about a possible, disagreement among new leadership members over domestic issues. There's totally no rumor about their possible disagreement over foreign policy. And I think especially treatment up to now of the crisis with Japan over Diaoyu. And I think that we observe in Beijing every day, we have not found any indication of possible disagreements among leaders. But of course, and for domestic issues, and of course, and I think that the front is might be not so consolidated. But foreign policy, we have not seen any possible indication of disagreement. And also, I think that maybe only one thing is perhaps certain. For North Korean policy in the future, and now among top leaders, and one member, and Zhang Dejiang, is really known their language, and he has experience in their country. So I think this is an important factor. And from now on, new leadership, when they decided something about North Korea, and they will, first of all, listen to Zhang Dejiang's opinion.
Linda.
This is extraordinary. In the past, there is no such similar situation.
Professor Xie already said what I was going to add to that, and I already mentioned that on North Korea we really don't know. Will it be President Hu or General Secretary Xi when and if this test is made? But certainly on the Senkaku Diaoyu issue, Xi has been in the lead.
But if I could also...
One intervention. I think that over, to deal with confrontation with Japan over Diaoyu, I think that this is a joint leadership between Hu and Xi. But for, missile, possible missile launch, and treatment, I think Supreme Commander is Xi, no question.
Could I just ask you, Professor Yamaguchi, I agree with Professor Shah. Could see externally no sign of any disagreement in Chinese foreign policy over the handling of the Senkaku Jiaoyu. It seemed completely consistent from day one. But in Tokyo, where I was both 2 years ago during the crisis in 2010 and just before the party congress this year, everywhere you go, that is offered as the explanation. Leadership transition, people have to act tough. Is that argument still heard in Tokyo, or people? Is it wishful thinking, or is it based on something?
My personal view is again optimistic. Even though some people are very high tense, time resolve the issue, and of course new administration, both Chinese and Japanese administration in Korea, and may do the things from the scratch. So we don't want to lose. And I wanted to quote Secretary Clinton's remarks in Annapolis, 10th of April. She said, today's geopolitics cannot afford to be a zero-sum game. And a thriving China is good for America, a thriving America is good for China. But if we fail to be plus-sum, if it is zero-sum, we are going to have minus-sum game. So we are really critical at the critical juncture.
So other questions? Sorry, the third row here.
Thank you very much. I'm Togo from Japan. And I want to thank Professor Jackson and Professor Shi for a very constructive way the dialogue is developing in this room. When I heard you first this evening, that to have a refix for Japan-China relations, there's a need for some equation. The equation which you first explained seems to be that Japan will keep our position on Senkaku, but China will continue entering into the territorial waters. In my view, as you have heard this morning, that will not make a stable equation. Why? Because every time Chinese ships goes into territorial waters, there will be emotion accumulated on our side, and in our new government, this emotion is very dangerous. But now, having heard Professor Shi, as I understood, provided that Japan relinquish this position, which I personally do not support at all, that there is no territorial issue between our two countries, provided that we change this position and we have a real talk, then there may be a possibility of a new equation, that Japan will keep these three nose positions, and that China will, well, you don't have to say it, but in real terms will stop entering into the territorial waters. Well, this is one of the most sort of optimistic news I heard in the last month or so. And as you know, these islands are not a dreamland for the wild birds. These islands at this point is governed by goats. And my vision is that then in a year time or 2 years time, Japan and China can sit quietly and discuss what to do about these goats. And we can come, I think, to an agreement that we together will sort of, goats are dangerous because devouring the vegetation. Come up to a better solution than the goats and transform the image of these islands. I think if we can do the first reset, this is distinctly within our future possibility. Thank you very much.
I think, I think according to my best observation, of course my government have not told me, but according to my best observation, China's precondition for a minimally normal relation with Japan is Japan must abandon what I said, my doctrine. Recognized by Japanese Prime Minister next, or by Foreign Affairs Minister, that there is, whatever language you, there is a sovereign dispute over this island. Then basis for negotiation were established. But China, up to now, and according to my best observation, China totally have already not, want to, go back to the status quo and existed before September 10th. So, regularized pattern will continue in all possibility. Of course, Chinese government, whether President Hu Jintao's administration or President Xi Jinping administration, really want the general stability, not only in this region, but with relation with Japan. But over this crisis, their first objective is not stability. The first objective in the context of Chinese public opinion, which they emphasize again and again, is that over this battle, we must overcome Japan.
Would anybody else like to comment on whether there's a chance that Japan might accept there as a dispute?
Sooner or later, necessary. Sooner or later. I think that Abe, I personally guess is that Abe will Abe will try to revise the Pacific Constitution, which of course will remind the Chinese people, Chinese armed forces, that Japan is go a dangerous road. But still, he have two issues to be decided. Whether go to Yakuchin Shrine, and whether, to make some concession to Chinese in the form of abandoning Maihara doctrine. I personally think that it's easy for him to make some concession and establish some basis for negotiating over Diaoyu, because Liberal Democratic Party from 72, 40 years are quite, loyal, compatible with just like Chinese government to keep the status quo. Maihara doctrine is Democratic Party of Japan's production. I think our Prime Minister, future Prime Minister, if he elected, Shinzo Abe have no obligation to insist on disastrous position of Liberal Democratic Party's mistake. But of course, my guess is that if he recognizes there's sovereign dispute of Diaoyu, he will go to Yakuchin Shrine. Another crisis. But Yakuchin Shrine with crisis is far from real dangerous than Diaoyu crisis. So I hope that next Japanese Prime Minister, anyway, public say there's sovereign dispute over Diaoyu. That's all.
We've very little time left, so can I just pick up any last questions there and there at the back? We'll take those two questions over here.
Okay, I'm Yinhong of Seoul National University. What if CCP, since 1945, allowed Britain to keep the Hong Kong until 1997, right? It took 50 more years to transfer the sovereignty. What if China offers Japan to keep Japan, the Diaoyu or Senkaku Island, for a certain period of time? Maybe it can be a answer, although you ended Russian list of product and Taiwan and Yonsei. You didn't allow them to keep it, but you ended. But Hong Kong case was flexible. So why don't you try to be more flexible to keep, peace and stability in the Northeast Asian region?
I think that from Japanese perspective, it's unfortunate.
Could we take the other questions? We're really running out of time, and then give
Along these lines, Troy Stangeron with the Asan Institute. Basically, you said that in this situation, the leadership has to take and basically win out, that's what the public demands. So my question would be, if this was taken to international arbitration and China lost, could China accept that?
Victor, perhaps we'd like to start with you, and if maybe everybody takes 30 seconds to say any closing thoughts.
From Japanese perspective, it's unfortunate that Japan would to keep 100% administrative control over Diaoyu for indefinite time. And Chinese government, before September 10th, prepared for that. But Ishihara and then Noboru broken this, prospect. And this time, and after Japan, destroyed one of the important, political bases for Sino-Japan relation in the past 40 years, Chinese government is not preparing to return to what, status quo, which is broken by Japan itself. I think that Japan lost something. And of course, for Chinese popular nationalism, And this is really, in some way, this is a great challenge for China's future foreign policy. And China's Hu Jintao, especially in most recent years, and I believe Xi Jinping will, in the future years, face a biggest dilemma. Biggest dilemma is China's national strategic requirement versus domestic restraints, especially including popular nationalism and international restraints. International restraints, for example, U.S. spirit, Japanese nationalization of oil is stimulated. Domestic, restraints. And I think up to now, for more than 50% of time, leaders cannot realize their sometimes perceived very clearly, national strategic requirements in foreign policy.
Thank you. Linda, would you like to go next?
I'll sum up by coming back to this question of domestic public opinion, which is very strong in both countries, and in both countries is at least perceived by the political leaders as restraining their room to maneuver. And coming back to what Professor Lee was saying, if we don't have completely fresh thinking and a completely new reset button for how to deal with nationalism, both from Xi Jinping's and other leaders and on the Japanese side, we are going to see a spiraling down of this crisis.
My closing comment on this issue is this. Nationalism is a tool that many Asian governments have abused in the past. And I think as a responsible stakeholder in the world, China must also understand that if you emphasize nationalism for your purposes, it is not as if the entire Asian countries share your view. This is why I believe firmly that Asia's future lies in institutionalizing democracy. Democracy is messy, it is unwieldy, and it will also result in basically chaotic policy at times. But the truth lies in the fact that if the people are able to speak in a free voice, they have the choice to kick out their government. That is, I think, the litmus test of where Asia should be. Every country has a choice to see what type of government you can put in, but I think this is why, as a Korean, I am most proud not of my country's economic development, but the fact that we can talk about human rights, democracy, and freedom without fear from our government.
I can see a whole big debate opening up there, which perhaps might keep us beyond dinner, let alone the reception, which is supposed to start 2 minutes ago. Mr. Yamaguchi, could you ask your final 30 seconds?
It has been a long day. I am very much optimistic about the future of U.S., Japan, Korea, Chinese relations. And there is no choice other than cooperation for the future of us. And particularly Sino-U.S. relations, if it is not constructive, we are not going to gain plus some gain. It's going to be minus some gain. And even Sino-Japanese too, if we cannot get plus some gain, it's going to be minus gain. The one small point of that, Abe might be the next prime minister. He's going to be pragmatic, and I remember that he's a guy to reconcile the relations between China and Japan after Koizumi administration's era. And he visited Beijing for the first his overseas trip. And I hope that happens again. And during the other Abe administration, lots of discussion was made on the constitution, not revision of constitution, but division of interpretation, and to the collective defense right. I don't want to go through all the things. One thing, the problem is according to the rigid interpretation, we cannot save other peacekeepers' life while we are able to be saved. So in other words, Chinese PLA soldiers can help us when we are in danger. And if Chinese soldiers are in danger, we cannot go to help. If that happens, another history issue will become.
Good point. Well, thank you to my panel for a very interesting discussion. My apologies to you for having been a bad chairman and kept you 5 minutes late from your drink. And thank you to Asan again for hosting such an interesting discussion.